Hey everybody, and welcome to another You May Contribute a Verse. I'm Josh Munkin alongside my old buddy Brennan Jennerette for a conversation with Max Beaudry. Max is first and foremost someone who I fangirled over because of his work in television, namely among the ways that I fangirled was for his work in Muppet Babies, but I would encourage you to check out all the stuff, the TV stuff he's worked on. We are here, however, to talk about his book work. He is the author of a bunch of middle grade and above stuff. We talk a lot about his middle grade graphic novel, Aw Nuts, The Crumbelievable Adventures of Peanut and Jelly, which is just, as you might imagine, a real treat to read and is lovingly and hilariously illustrated by David Perry. Again, check out all of Max's stuff. There's a whole bunch of middle grade graphic novels, illustrated stuff that looks really compelling and really fun. Can't wait for you to hear the rest of our conversation. But first, a word from our sponsor, Tealmore Press. Tealmore has another book that will be coming out in September. As of recording, this will be next month. It is a book called Tricksters, Takers, and Team Players. Words by Alicia Gabriel and art by Vivian Sarkani about the weird ways that animals exhibit some behavior. So another just lovingly illustrated and lovingly put together book by Tealmore. Encourage you to check out Tricksters, Takers, and Team Players and everything else Tealmore has at tealmorepress.com. And now, without further ado, here is our conversation.
Thanks for coming on, Max. We're both very excited to have you. Josh messaged me and was like, it's Muppet Babies Day. And I was like, oh my God, that's right. Like, yay.
It used to be Muppet Babies Day every day for us. So thank you for your service to our family, Max.
Sure. Yeah, that's great to hear. It's just like a kind of a popular show amongst the kiddies.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, we used to watch them, like the original ones. We'd show them clips on YouTube, and when the new one came out, we were all about it. Had all the toys. Yeah. Had our favorite characters, the whole thing.
That is amazing. So my kid, I never introduced my kid to it. He just, I don't know, he's into other stuff, but I loved the Muppet Babies as a kid. So I have a fondness for them.
Muppet Babies though.
So I haven't seen them recently. Okay, but so let's talk about your Muppet Babies background. Like, how did that happen? And like, what was that like? Because that sounds like the best job ever.
Well, similar to what you were saying, I also grew up on the original Muppet Babies. Actually, it's sort of funny, I think, for some people, like my introduction to Muppets was Muppet Babies. I think there's people who grew up on the Muppets who, when they look at Muppet Babies, they're kind of like, oh yeah, that thing.
Right.
But that, to me, that's how I know those characters. I don't know them really. I didn't really watch the Muppets. So I really liked Muppet Babies as a kid. I remember I was a little afraid of Miss Piggy because she would always like kind of beat up Gonzo, and I was like, she's pretty scary.
Totally.
But so I really liked that show. And then the way that all kind of came about was I was writing on a show for Nickelodeon that was being produced by the same company that was producing Muppet Babies. Because it's for Disney, but a studio called Oddbot was producing it for them. And I was working on this Nickelodeon show that Oddbot was also producing, and they were ramping up season 2 and wanted to bring in new writers. And so because of that, they brought me in to a story summit to like pitch ideas. And then based on that summit, then they hired me as a staff writer. So yeah, it was really cool. There had been a whole first season. It hadn't come out yet, but I was obviously familiar with the characters. Format was a little bit different now. Also, it was definitely not as surreal. If you go back and watch the old Muppet Babies, it was
pretty weird. Pretty off the wall. It was
pretty weird. Yeah, exactly. And like one of the calling cards of it was it would have like iconic footage in there. And what we discovered is we hardly did that in our show because it was so expensive. They did it in season 1, and we did it a couple times, but like Muppet Babies, what I remember is they did it quite frequently, and it really just was kind of an acid trip a little bit. And this was this was a more refined, maybe, more stories that were relatable. In fact, I remember rewatching old clips because in season 2, we brought Robin back to the playroom, right? Kermit's little nephew. And I was like, when was he in the original Muppet Babies? And he was in he has a little tadpole in a bowl. There's like an episode, and there's this joke where Miss Piggy turns to Kermit as babies, and she's like, when are we gonna have our own little tadpole or whatever she says? And I, by the way, as a kid, I'm sure I thought that was hilarious and whatever. And now, like, working on the show, thinking, oh, we could never say something like that. But yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that was the 90s, right? When it was out.
Yeah.
Maybe,
I think it was early,
like
late 80s, early 90s. I mean, I was
Yeah.
watching it because I was born in 90, so I was probably watching the run of it on Nickelodeon or something in like 95, 96, maybe.
Yeah. I feel,
You youngster.
feel like, I was gonna say, because I feel like it might have been in reruns at that point, because I was born in 80, so I remember watching it with my cousin, and I mean I would have been 14, 15 and like 95, so I probably wasn't watching Muppet Babies then. I was probably younger, so yeah, maybe like, you know, mid late 80s is when. But yeah, I feel like rules and like things that are okay have definitely changed.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that was, like, again, even the way Miss Piggy, like I said, how she scared me was like when she would take Gonzo's nose and like turn it into like a balloon animal.
My God, yeah, she's pretty violent.
Yeah, well, like Gonzo was also kind of like a creep, like it was, and it's funny when you like re-listen to it, like when we were doing the newer show. I was like, oh yeah, that sounds like Gonzo, like the new person doing it. And then you like go back and you're like, oh wow, it did really sound very, very different. Like that Gonzo voice was so specific to that original series. Yeah, it was. And you know, we kept the whole thing of you never see Nanny's face.
Mm-hmm.
So we kept that, which posed a lot of like production challenges. But
Oh, really? That's interesting because you have sort of the blueprint from the original episode. It feels like, oh, they would have worked out all those like issues, and then like, here you go. This is how you do it. This is like the workaround.
well, you know, that show was 2D and our show was CG, and so you have to build models that actually work. And what you discover, right? Like, because in 2D,
I'm just now for the first time imagining what does the nanny model look like in a CG environment? Does it stop at the waist? Is the question.
no, so it is fully built. And in fact, we had one episode, I cannot remember which one, but we showed her silhouette where you kind of saw she kind of has like the mom bob. So we had a model with a face.
Interesting.
But the thing about like with CG, like with 2D, you can sort of cheat things, but you need those models to stay intact and to work. And so Miss Nanny, to be like out of frame, she's basically like 6'5". You know what I mean? Like you don't even really think about it. It's like the kids.
She's a retired basketball player. It's
sure,
like
exactly.
She had kids.
Yeah, like the kids are up to her knees, and you're like, okay, well, if they're like 3 feet, you know, you just realize, oh. And so it did pose some production sort of like thing. But again, I think also she doesn't feature in as much. And I'd have to go back and rewatch the old show, but I'm pretty sure it also was better there because she just left him for the day. She wasn't really nannying. She'd be like, you know, she'd open the episode, say something, and then maybe you'd see her at the very end, which was our episodes as well. But I think she interacted with them a little bit more, I think, in ours. I'd have to go back, and maybe there's some people out there who really are like diehard older Muppet Babies fans who'd be like, no, she was there all the time. But as I recall, I remember she kind of being in there and then kind of bouncing out.
Yeah, I'm going to go get you some snacks. And then like 4 hours later, she's back with the snacks.
Exactly.
Yeah, like what were you doing out there? Like,
well,
yeah.
That's also funny to even talk about the snacks, because talking about how shows in the past could do one thing and how we could do something else. In our version, you could see the mandate changing as the seasons went on, what snacks we were promoting. Like, you know, because, you know, big thing is like, I always want to be healthy and this and that. You know, one of the jokes we used to say was that like, it started off with like, okay, she's like, hey, everyone, I brought you juice. It's like, okay, juice is healthy. And then at a certain point, they were kind of like, you know what? Juice has a lot of sugar. What if it's milk? And then, so then halfway, you know, then there's episodes where it's like, oh, I brought you milk. And then eventually it got to the point where it's like, you know what? Maybe you should just bring the water because water is better for you. And it would be, you know, all of a sudden it sounded like they were kind of in a prison by like, hey, it's snack time. We've got water and crackers. And then we're like, yay.
Yeah, right. Cookies. You can't be bringing in like cookies every time, or
Yeah,
Was that a big issue?
well, no, I mean, across not just that show, but shows in general, like
Yeah.
it would be, you know, you when you want to have something that your character is excited for, like what are the stakes of the episode? And it's like, you know, back in the day, you might have seen shows where it's like someone's obsessed with candy and that's all they want to get. And it's like, okay,
Right.
now we can't do that. So the stakes are like, oh my gosh, I really want those carrot sticks. How am I ever going to get them? You know, and it's like, okay, sure. I mean, I like carrots, but
Right, you're like, but is that believable? I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, how can we like layer in like actual stakes? Yeah, because what kid is gonna like buy that? Yeah.
And we had one episode where on Muppet Babies it was called Curse of the Were Animal, where it was a Halloween episode. And again, writing Halloween episodes for preschool can sometimes be a little challenging because so much of a motivating factor is candy and like the consumption of it. For preschool in particular, it's like you don't want to lean into how amazing it, right? So
Right.
that episode, it was like, and our sort of workaround was it wasn't just that he ate a lot of candy that turns him into a werewolf or were animal. It's that he didn't eat his lunch and he ate candy instead of his lunch, which made him go a little like
Okay.
cuckoo. So it was
Right.
like, that was our little workaround to make it so that it wasn't just about the fact that he was wanting to eat candy. It was that he was forgoing his nutritional food to eat that.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I had a manuscript a while back that was, part of it was like these guys wanted to just eat ice cream and they wanted to, like, instead of being healthy and doing everything they were supposed to do and be good, they wanted to do things that were fun and bad and not good and eat ice cream. But then you end up assimilating eating ice cream with being bad, and it was like you can't do that, right? Like you don't want to demonize a food just because like it becomes really problematic, I guess is what I'm saying. So I get what you're saying. You can't just be like, well, candy is bad because it's it's not bad. So then if a kid eats candy and they're like, oh God, like I'm terrible, and you're like, no, that's not it. Yeah,
right. And I assume with your manuscript, the idea was you ultimately learn that's not what you should do in terms of like eating all that stuff. But it's interesting because in kids television, we call it like modeling, like you're modeling behavior. And so sometimes you show a bad thing to eventually show that it wasn't the right move. But sometimes, like a perfect example, I grew up with somebody who they were not allowed to watch the Rugrats because they started acting like Angelica. And obviously, if you watch the Rugrats, Angelica always gets a
She's
comeuppance.
awful.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
She always gets her comeuppance. You always go like, okay,
Right.
she's mean, but whatever. But if you're modeling it and a kid just goes, well, I don't really care about the comeuppance part. I'm just going to
Right.
be bossy. So it's like this tricky balancing act of you got to show the behavior that you're trying to say is not necessarily good. But in doing that, sometimes you model it. And so then kids will do it. So it really is a fine line.
yeah,
Shout out to the perfect example of that, Caillou, which is why every parent hates Caillou, because he has no consequences for being just such a whiny little problem child.
Yeah. I've never watched that show, but I've seen all the memes and stuff about how, yeah, he's sort of like maybe a whiny kid and maybe there are no consequences, which is even wilder. But yeah, even if you do have consequences, sometimes it's still... That's why you'll find a lot of characters, even when they do the wrong thing, what we call it like doing the wrong thing for the right reasons. We don't often have really like malicious characters in pre-K. Not often. Sometimes you have like a true like villain, but a lot of times you don't because it's really, you just don't want to model that behavior. And even when you do model the behavior, you're trying to soften it the whole time. So your stakes... Right. It is a real balancing act writing for these shows because you want to make it feel like there's an actual conflict, but you're also trying to make sure the conflict isn't so repeatable or so like, you don't want to model it for kids.
right. Or like too fun or like too like, yeah, you don't want them to like sort of really like that character because then it's like, oh, this is like my role model now. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, this is for sure true for Muppet Babies and a lot of other shows. I remember reading recently some writing advice that said, basically, if your characters get stuck, just give them not the least logical thing to do in that situation, but give them like a normal way to approach this problem and have extrapolate that to the very extreme. Make sure that they communicate in the worst way possible. Give them these roadblocks, and part of that is like signaling. Miss what you're talking about, doing the wrong thing for the right reason, signaling to the audience like you're supposed to know watching this what should be done instead of what is being done. They're goofing around and making mistakes. There's kind of a formula to how you can unlock that in a way that doesn't show,
right.
Piggy being a jerk,
right?
With
it's
having
like
some goodness behind it.
Like you want the reader or like the audience to sort of be in on it. Like, haha, like we see what you're doing. Like that's not cool. Like we get it. Yeah, right. But that's hard.
Especially for kids. That's like a big thing. Maybe writing for older audiences, it's a little bit different, but with kids, you want them in on the joke. You're trying to, from the beginning of the episode, you're trying to have them understand what is the problem here. And there's nothing sillier for, it feels like for a kid to go, oh, they're not supposed to do that, if they can, you know what I mean? So, yeah, it's really interesting writing for kids. Like, there's different levels of writing. You can write for pre-K, then you can write for older kids, and then you write for adults. But it's just really interesting the types of things that you don't even think about necessarily, like modeling behavior or something. It hadn't really crossed my mind too much because I started off working on shows that were older. And we had obviously notes about, you couldn't do certain things because it's still for kids, but it was also comedy driven stuff. So you could do a lot. But when you're talking about pre-K, it's like anything that you think, oh, this will be funny. And they'll go, okay, well, is it funny if little Timmy at home then does that thing? We should really, it's like, basically it's this, everyone kind of looks around and be like, okay, if we do this, they're constantly gauging whether, is this something imitatable? Will kids want to emulate? And if so, is that a problem? So it really is like trying to like walk that tightrope of writing something that's funny and adventurous. I mean, Muppet Babies, the one good thing I will say that helped that with that is that because of imagination, you could kind of like, once you put them, like I wrote a Star Trek episode, once you put them in space, some of it's suddenly the imitatable behavior is less likely. So you can do that.
Yeah,
like,
right.
We had that as our benefit of the minute you brought them to like the Wild West or something that like, and they're swinging across a canyon. You're like, well, I don't necessarily think the kids at home are going to try to swing across a canyon.
Right. Like, how would you have access? Where are you going to do this? Like, there's too many like real life obstacles where it's like, it's not, you're sort of like in the clear. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so this is like a perfect like setup because, sorry, Josh, but I was going to say like, how does this sort of cross over to how you're writing for graphic novels? Because this is your debut graphic novel and, sort of like sub question to that, like, how did you get into that? Like, what was that road like? And how did you, make that decision?
Yeah, well, it's funny because that writing books is actually what I thought I was going to do as a kid. My dad he actually wanted to be a writer and he was like an English major in college. And so he would make me and my sister read like the classics as kids, like those, I forget what they're called, but they're sort of those illustrated versions of them. So like I remember reading in third grade, like Moby Dick, but it was, again, I don't remember the brand called, but they were still a book, but I think they were consolidated. And like King Arthur, I think my sister had to read Oliver Twist. He was just, and he would take us to like the library and we'd rent movies, and he really got us into Lord of the Rings at a really young age. So I always really enjoyed writing. And I think, especially as a kid, I know what a book looks like, visually know. Like when you say you wrote a book, I know exactly what you did. As a kid, when you tell them you wrote a movie or you write for TV, it's a little, they're not quite understanding that because you don't read scripts or, there's a process. But with a book, like that's the thing. You write it and it's that. So I really wanted to be a writer. I was very, very much of the generation of very inspired by Captain Underpants. I feel like that was a big reason why I even really got into it. And so I'd write my own stories. And so that's what I thought I was going to do. That's what I wanted to do. And then as I got older, I went to college, and I was trying to figure out what my major would be because I knew I wanted to write. But I ended up going to film because I felt like at that point I then did understand how film and TV writing worked a little bit more. And I thought, okay, this feels like maybe a more well-rounded major where I could do it all. Now, it's pretty ironic to call film a well-rounded major because most people, if you say you're going into film, they'd say, why not go into business and then hope you learn something about film?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So then anyway, so eventually I broke into TV and film, which was awesome. But I never lost sight of the fact that I really do love books. I think especially if you've worked in TV and film long enough, you discover that, it's really hard to get something made. I mean, it's so expensive. It takes so much time, and there's a lot of risk. I mean, if you create a show and it doesn't do well, that's a lot of money that potentially a studio loses. But with a book, a single book is a little bit, there's lower stakes for publishers. I think they're equally hard to create, but you can take more risks, which is why I love reading books, because there's the wackiest books out there that could only exist in a book form first. Because if you pitched it to a TV studio, I think they'd go, well, what are we supposed to do with this? But in a book world,
how would this get made?
Yeah, exactly. It can be really silly and ridiculous. So I never lost sight of that. And then my book that actually just came out last week, On Nuts, I pitched that as a short to Nickelodeon back in like 2014, like a really long time ago. The book is about Peanut and Jelly, the two characters living in this food world and trying to get to the top of the food pyramid, the social hierarchy. But it all started because I really love peanut butter, and I was working I know, it's like, I love peanut butter. And so when I was working on Dora and Friends, which was kind of like the spinoff of Dora the Explorer, I was PA, and I had all these Post-its, and I can't draw. I cannot draw, but I can doodle, because I can at least doodle. And I was just trying to think of a show concept that was like high concept. I was like, oh, let me just whatever. So I drew a peanut, and then I drew a little splat of jelly, and I was like, oh, okay, but what if these guys were friends? And then I said, okay, so they probably live in a food world. And I just started asking myself questions, and I thought about the food pyramid. And I was like, oh, what if that was like where they fell on the social ladder? And then basically what I would do over the course of that show, working on Dora and Friends, I would just have Post-its, and I'd constantly draw a new like food character and like give it a personality. And eventually my cubicle, I had like a whole board of like, oh man, I want to say like 50 food characters. And again, they weren't drawn very well, but they got the job done. Like you knew the asparagus guy. You're like, all right, I think I know what he is. And I just always thought it was really like weird. And I'll never forget the day I pitched it to Nick. I was like, okay, I'll pitch it as a short, because I used to do the shorts. And a buddy of mine, it was actually his last day at Nick that day, and he's like, oh, I'm moving over to Disney on a new show. I was like, oh man, bummer, what's the show? And he said, oh, I don't know if it's been announced, but it's called Peanut and Pickle. And I was like, okay, question. Is the
son of a gun?
I was like, is the character's name Peanut, or are they a peanut? He's like, oh no, it's like an actual peanut and a pickle. And I'm not even joking, that was also the day I was going to go pitch that. And I was like, okay, well, this should be fun.
Like, good heads up, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember going into that pitch, and I pitched the whole thing out, and then the guy who was running development at the time is like very complimentary of all this stuff, and he's like, a couple things I have to consider. I don't know if you're aware, Disney has a show with a peanut. I said, I just found out today. I'm aware. And they said, yeah, it's like, hey, it's not like it's a no. It's just, we'll have to keep that in mind. And I remember thinking,
yeah,
I'm sure yeah. Thank you.
Which you consider other legumes.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then funny enough, they passed, obviously. And then maybe like a year later, I went and because Cartoon Network also had a short program. So I went and pitched it to them. And I pitched it all out. And the woman there who used to run development was super sweet. And I remember, again, I was still earlier in my career, but I have a pretty good like EQ, I feel. And I just remember after the pitch, she was like, Max, I just want you to know, no matter what happens, your pitch is amazing. You did such a good job. I was like, okay, so we're definitely not moving forward, but appreciate this. And so then she walked me out and she's like, we're chatting and she's walking me out. We walk through the development hallway, which is where they have all the stuff of everything they're working on. So at the time there's like Infinity Train stuff and I'm trying to think what else was there. But as we were walking, I saw all the artwork for Apple and Onion, which was a show coming down the pike.
Son of a...
And I know, I was like, wow, and again, she didn't say anything and she probably didn't even notice that I clocked it, but I just saw this entire, sheet of all these food characters. And obviously this was like a year or before Apple and Onion actually came out. I just was like, yeah, exactly. Son of a, like, I'm just so late, and animation takes so long that it's like, these things have probably been cooking for a while, no pun intended, and then here we got all these food shows, and so I'm coming in there thinking, well, there's no food shows, I think it should be fine, and then nope, all these studios.
Right.
Well, for what it's worth, those food shows were awful. No, of course, I'm kidding.
It's funny, actually, I'm not sure if I don't think I watched either of them, and not out of bitterness either. I think it was like... I think I didn't have cable or something, but it was just one of those things. So anyway, I had this idea that I always really loved, but I just couldn't get it made as a show, which by the way, getting a show made is so hard. It's like, you have to have so many, like, not only does your thing have to be amazing, but again, it can't be competing with something they're already doing. And they also have to see like a way forward with it in terms of merchandise and this. So it was, I could see the writing on the wall that it was not going that direction. And so then finally during the pandemic, I had written a pilot for the actual, because I'd always just written a short, but I was like, I kind of want to explore this world more. And so I wrote pilot, and then I had become really good friends with a really talented illustrator named David, and he and I had collaborated on a few things, and I just said, hey, do you want to make a graphic novel? Figuring I didn't think I was going to go through a traditional publisher just to make it for ourselves. And he was like, sure. So over the course of the pandemic, we made it,
Wow. I mean, that's fun. Like, that's a great way to spend the pandemic, like exploring this world.
Making
like,
a graphic novel? Heck yes.
That sounds like a great way to spend that time. Yeah.
Well, it certainly was for me. I will say, for David, because you got to give so much credit to the illustrator, because writing it is, it was fun, but it also doesn't take as much of your time to really, like, David, inked and illustrated, and like he had so much detail and he did so good, and I know he had fun with it, but I'm very indebted to him for doing such a good job, because and for like staying the course, because it's no easy task to like, build something from the ground up and draw every single page. And because at the time, because it was just us, like I said, he's inking it, he's coloring it, he's lettering it. It was a learning experience for both of us, but I know a lot of it was on his shoulders. So again, I always give as much praise to David as I can, because he really knocked it out of the park.
You're like, if this helps, here's 50 Post-its. If this makes your job any easier.
I tried to find those Post-its because I wanted to do like a funny side-by-side, and then I feel like I did show David some of them, but I have no idea where they are now, which is a bummer, because again, they were terrible, but it is like, it's just funny to look at them. But yeah, no, exactly. I there were a couple times, like for the cover, I remember I like drew a really rudimentary, like, this is kind of what I'm thinking. I hope that you can see what's here and then make it actual, like actualize it.
Right.
But what I loved about working with David too is he has so many ideas that, at some point, writing a comic script it's really a conversation between you and the artist. And sometimes I could just say like, oh, David, just do that thing where they're kind of like, make sure it's really, they may have really big expressions, like think like Beetlejuice or something when they freak out at. And David was always someone who would go, okay, I'll not only will I do that, but I'll amplify it. Or he'd come back and say, hey, I know you wrote it like this. What I think I have a really fun idea. Like there's a page where Jelly transforms into a Blue Man Group guy. And for his Crumb solo. And so I kind of wrote something, and then David was like, hey, I've got this crazy idea. Can I just run with it? And I was like, sure. And then he did this like epic splash page of it. And I was like, yeah, exactly. By the way, it's a very pun filled book. The world is mixed on puns. Some people are like I one time spoke to a book reviewer and I said, oh, I've got this book if you don't mind reviewing it. And as soon as she saw it, she said, by the way, I don't do puns, so I'm not sure if you want me to review it. I was like, okay, fair enough.
Okay, yeah, never
but
mind.
David, I wrote all the puns that they speak, but David did so much like background work. Like there's all these little fun tidbits in the book itself of like different buildings.
And there's some like borderline stuff that you guys got in there. Like he does the Nutcracker in one page, and there's a story that's called Banana Hammocks. I was really surprised.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. So funny enough, Nutcracker, I wrote that because I was just thinking of his funny dances. And then I realized that the dancing pose that David did for that one, and only later that I was like, oh, because that actually I wasn't trying to be cheeky. It was just like, just trying to think of funny, like whatever. But yes, banana hammocks. I don't know what you're talking about. It's just hammocks, man. It's just for bananas to lay in a hammock. I don't know.
Technically, it was bananas. Bananas hammocks is probably how you squeaked it in there.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it's just perfectly good hammocks for morsels to lay in.
Bananas. Hey, just a quick mid-conversation break to talk about a couple of books, and then I guess some other stuff. We'll see what happens. Brenna's switching up her review this week to showcase Go Play by friends of the pod, Kate Allen Fox and Gennie Gorback. If you're a parent or a caregiver in any capacity to kids, you will want to check this book out. It covers every aspect of play you can think of. From what is play? Are you a bad parent if you don't like to or don't want to engage in play? And spoiler, if you're not, how does screen time enter the conversation? As a parent, Brenna, in this case, found a ton of validation, ideas, and sheer relief in the pages of this book that maybe, just maybe, she's doing at least a few things right in terms of play and supporting her kid. First person review. This is a must-have, easy reference for any parent or caregiver. Grab yours today, and I will just echo that by saying that talking to Kate and Gennie, which will be an upcoming conversation, was a real treat, and they have just a huge amount of passion for this subject. For my review, what surprised me about Becca McMurdie's Just a Shell or Is It was that I hadn't heard about it before it came out. Great picture books seem simple but aren't, and this one, with its straightforward premise and crayon-like illustrations done by Paula Escobar, is subversive in its simplicity. Becca and Paula capture what is mostly lost as we become adults, but one of the best things about being a picture book author, and its perspective, the ability to look at and approach the world with a kind of enduring, childlike wonder. This can be a fun beach read, literally if you take it on its face, but it's also a reminder to all ages to look deeper and to look differently. Check out Go Play, and check out Just a Shell or Is It, and check out everything that we have going on and all of our previous episodes at our Linktree, linktree.com/verseshow or verse.show. And now back to our conversation with Max. Yeah. It sounds like part of what we've talked about with other people who've done graphic novels, and I mean, Brenna, you've had this experience too, is being a writer only on a graphic novel is really hard. You circumvented that in the traditional process by just doing it, which makes it easy in one sense until you get to the traditional publishing, it takes a village phase where you've got feedback and rewrites and redraws and all that. And so I'm curious what that was like. I mean, approaching these traditional pathways with something that was done, where you at least presumably probably had a different mindset for how the business gets done, how you pitch things, and how this negotiation happens once you've got an idea.
Yeah, well, and you're right. It's a tough path with graphic novels just as a writer. But funny enough, I have tons of experience in this because same with animation, when you pitch a show, we're all very visual. And sometimes you see something and you just go, yeah, that's really charming. it's not that you can't sell charm in the written word, but, you know, I think if SpongeBob had been pitched just with words, it would not have had the same effect when you see the visuals. So I've experienced it a lot of, you know, pairing up with artists to see if they can help bring your vision to life. And at a certain point, if a studio knows you well enough, they can kind of take your word for it with when you're writing something. But so in this case, yes, I had not really even dipped into the book world, and David and I made this, which is how I sort of circumvented it. And then I published it, self-published it, and then I ended up pitching it to Paper Cuts, who decided to buy it from me and republish it. And then once they liked that, then they bought another book from me. And yeah, it circumvented that process. But I will say that I still do get it. Like, I'll write graphic novels, and I've talked to different publishers or even agents who say, you know, they don't represent only writers of graphic novels, because again, it's so hard. It's so much easier to say, okay, this is the person who's going to draw and write it. You like their stuff? Wonderful. I've been fortunate enough to pair up with some really talented people, and I think the reason that they're down to do stuff together is because I basically find people who have similar ambition level and similar, but yes, it is tough as just a writer in the graphic novel space. In the book space, you know, that's fine because that is the book, but there's just a lot more guesswork that a publisher has to take if I pitch them a project and then once we get the artist, you know, it'll be really great. And they're like, well, I don't know, actually.
So I had a question too while you were talking about, you know, you had this idea, you sort of wrote it out, then you approached David and you were like, hey, let's like do this together. So in the graphic novel world, it's in the kidlit space specifically, because that's, you know, where we're coming from. But I've written a couple, but it's so interesting because it's the inverse of writing a picture book. Like in a picture book, they're like really lay off the art notes, like leave a ton of room for the illustrator. Like you don't want to make that sort of your space too, because you want to sort of like have this collaboration. But with a graphic novel, they're like, no, you need to be really specific, like really lay out the scene, every art note, like all of the things. You want everything in there. So it's hard to go back and forth from one to the other. But I guess what I'm asking is, because you and David worked so closely on it, did you have art notes like in your original draft? And like, what did they look like? Because, you know, if you sort of knew you were going to work with a friend, they might have just sort of been blocked off, like this scene looks like this, and like I'll just, you know, fill David in later. So yeah, right. I guess I'm curious, what did that look like?
Well, because my background is in film writing specifically, everything I write starts off in like that kind of format.
Like interior banana hammocks or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. No, that'll be the sequel. I'm like, hey, Paper Cuts, I know a guy he really, really is hoping that the sequel is featured around bananas hammocks. And they're like, well, all right, if Josh wants it. No, but yeah, you're right.
Idea.
But yeah, interior. And so, you know, you don't have to be as in depth when you're writing. Like, in fact, you're trying to be more brief on the page. So what I do is I would take those pages and then I would embellish it. Like, you know, if I say Peanut and Jelly walk down the street cautiously looking for the crumb feeder, then I could put in brackets like below it, like, you know, the street can be slightly disheveled as if something had just happened. But then I'll say, but play around with it so it just hooks up to the surrounding scenes. So my notes would be very kind of casual. And I think that's another thing to what you're talking about, is that it is so not fun to read those kind of scripts. As if I was an editor, like that's totally not fun. But if I saw the page, then you're like, oh, okay, I'm enjoying it. That's why even like reading scripts, like I love reading TV and film scripts. Comic scripts they're really more like, it's hard to take them for their content, because it is content, but it's also then the explanation. So it's kind of like stuff with footnotes 24/7.
That's so valid, because it really interrupts your flow. Like if you're going to read a graphic novel script, you're like, okay, like I put all my art notes in gray. So it's like, okay, here's the art note. Then like, here's all the dialogue. Here's how it's paneled out. Like that's all in black. So you can sort of like get right to like the dialogue and what's happening. And then to inform it, you can like go back to the art notes. So it's, I'm, trying not to be like too intrusive, but in a graphic novel, I mean, there's only so much of that you can account for, because like if you don't know what the scene is and then you go straight to the dialogue, it's like, well, now you don't know what's going on, and then you got to go back and forth and try to like orient. So it feels very like disorienting. So yeah, so like if you're an editor and you do graphic novels and you're just like, oh man, like another one of these, like if your initial art note is boring, I can imagine how they're just like, no, like I have no interest in like trying to even orient myself to this thing, because it's just like such a slog. I'm looking at 70 pages of this,
Right.
So,
which is why I will say it also, for me at least, again, because I'm only the writer, I've been very fortunate where I've teamed up with people who, it's kind of like that balancing act. You do this in TV as well, where, a script needs to be as informative as possible so you get everything, but you also, it's like finding that middle ground of how controlling you are is like, like someone walks into the room 5 paces, then turns, does it. It's like, you don't want to get there, right?
Right,
you want to evoke a feeling and allow the director and the board artist to interpret and make things work, but you also don't want to not give them enough so that they're like, well, I have no idea what this writer was expecting. They just said...
Totally.
Right? So with the graphic novels, like I'm working on another one for Paper Cuts right now, and I'm working with a really talented artist, Sarah, who I've worked with in the industry and like in animation and stuff. And what I love about working with her is that because she's been a supervising director, board artist, I can say less and she understands what I'm saying, so I don't have to be so like, only sometimes there's very specific stuff. Like if you're like, this is going to come back into play later, so make sure that like we highlight this,
right?
That kind of stuff. But otherwise, I can write it a bit more, like a screenplay, and I'm just breaking it up into panels, which is a little bit different. But I don't have to get too, if I have to say too much, my thought is either I'm being too controlling or maybe this person is not the right fit for the project, which I've never experienced that part of it, but I could see the former being like, maybe I'm just being too like not trusting them to kind of get it. So,
right. No, that's an interesting piece of it, because if you're going to be an author only graphic novel author, you really have to trust the illustrator on the other end to sort of like pick up like the clues that you're leaving behind. I mean, a graphic novel is much more prescriptive than just like clues or like a breadcrumb.
Sure.
Like you want them to know what you're saying. It's not like you're trying to solve this mystery, but yeah, you know what I'm saying? It's like, if they're not quite getting it, it's like, oh, like I really want you to be able to do this. And I don't want to be, like a helicopter parent, like hovering over your every move. But you also have to like, you have to give up some of it. You can't just, it's not yours anymore. Like once it gets, seen by like an agent, now it's the agent is into it too. And like the editor is now on board, and now you've got the illustrator. It's like, it's not just yours. It's this whole sort of like collaborative effort, which is, you have to have a lot of trust there.
Totally. And in fact, I think that part of it might even be my favorite because, obviously I'm writing something that I can visualize, but there are times where I'm writing something being like, okay, I think this works, but I'm not 100%. I think it works. I think. And then what's great is that if you're working with someone you trust, like the best feeling is when they bring something back to you and you're like, oh my gosh, that's even better than what I thought it was going to be. Like they
you're
really...
Like, not only did you get it, but you like elevated it. You're like, thank you.
Totally. Like that was my favorite, like working on Nuts, when I would say, David, this scene, it's going to be, think of like the movie Tremors and like that. And he's like, oh, okay, I got a cool idea. And then he'd come back with something and I'm like, yes, like it was always, I feel like David took so many swings and they always were like really, really exciting. And one of the biggest feedbacks I've gotten is that a lot of people say like reading it, they feel like they're watching a cartoon more than reading a book. And I think as David really nailed that sort of flow so that it feels very dynamic, and his art is so good in there. So I was very, very thrilled.
When there is so much movement to that point. And to me, the writing comes out, I went into reading on Nuts knowing that you were a TV writer, but the structure stuff, the story beats and things came out super clearly, the moment of, their darkest hour and all the things that you would expect out of like a pilot for a show, or the way that a TV show is experienced and paced, felt really clear here too. So,
well, thank you. Again, David really helped. I think, when you're writing something and you initially envisioned it for animation, you can, like, selling a joke in a graphic novel is a lot harder than in animation because you've got to find your keyframes. And David really found a way to distill the humor in a way that still kept it feeling like the momentum was good. And yeah, I was thrilled to see how it was coming along and feeling like, wow, this feels like it's a show, which again, I want it to feel like a book, but to me, the books that were very exciting to me were the ones that had this like real movement to them.
Is there more on Nuts? Like, I know you guys self-published it. Oh, you look like you're reaching for something.
I was looking at the book itself. I actually have my old self-published copy here. But you mean, is there more in terms of like sequels and whatnot?
Yeah, understanding the full context of the book in terms of a pandemic project collab with David. You self-published it, and then it got picked up by Paper Cuts. Kirk Reedstrom is a graphic novelist that we've talked to a few months ago. He's a great dude. Shout out, Kirk, if you're reading.
Yeah, he's a good friend of mine as well.
Nice.
Awesome.
That's how I learned about
Kirk.
his podcast, actually, through Kirk.
Oh, I love
Kirk.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
Kirk's
he's great.
Bomb. But yeah, we talked to him extensively about his journey to Duck and Moose and that great partnership, and how that similarly feels very, very movementy, very Odd Couple. And obviously that's a series. And comparing and contrasting, do you have the same feeling about Aw Nuts and Peanut and Jelly? Given the full context, like, what would you say to Disney or Nickelodeon if they were like, hey, this feels like a show, like, let's put some more frames to this and make something of it?
Yeah, ultimately that would be the dream. These are Aw Nuts is very much reminiscent of the shows that I sort of grew up on. One of the things we're seeing right now is that we're not making as many of those kind of shows because the kid, and obviously you guys probably know this as parents, but like, kids at this age, they get pulled in a lot of different directions, and the days of, the 7-year-old being sat in front of the TV because their favorite sort of wacky cartoon is on, that still happens, but it's like, I remember when SpongeBob premiered, I think it was 99, I was 9, and it was like, okay, I cannot wait to watch it. To get a 9-year-old to sit in front of a TV now and wait for their favorite cartoon to come on, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit of a trickier audience. So that being said, I don't know if the world is necessarily clamoring for these type of shows at the moment, but I would love to do it. My goal is to, hopefully progress the series in terms of sequels with Paper Cuts. It all depends on sales. Things have been good so far, but you never know. And then, yeah, I would love to make it a show, just because I feel like it would be so much, I could explore more. I feel like enough time has passed from Pickle and Peanut and Apple and Onion, maybe. Unless all of a sudden I go to pitch it again and they're like, oh, we're rebooting Pickle and Peanut. I'm like, no.
Yeah, right? Like, are you kidding me?
Right.
We're doing Adventure Time, but food this time.
Right, exactly.
Sorry.
It's just food. Yeah, so I also did discover, not that this will ever be an issue, but my world that they live in is Foodtopia, but that's also the same. I guess the Sausage Party show is called Foodtopia.
Oh, yikes! Not an association
really?
You want to draw.
So maybe we should do a crossover where a kids show enters Sausage Party.
That's where banana hammocks come in.
That's where, banana hammocks can live in both worlds.
That Venn diagram is real.
Yeah, exactly.
Small there.
But yeah, so to answer your question, yes, I would love to do it, just because again, this is the kind of I love silly stuff. I find it to be these kind of cartoons, for me at least, sat at an age where it's a little less cynical. It can be silly. Silly can be the main humor. It's not, that's why I think SpongeBob really endured. It's just so silly and ridiculous. And there's heart to it. Like, I love writing buddy comedies because I love I grew up on like buddy comedy films. I am one of two. I have just a sister, so I'm used to doing things in pairs, and I love that dynamic. And I wanted to make sure that, they liked each other as characters as well. Like, I wanted them to have a real friendship and the hilarity that comes with it. So yeah, I would love to do something with it if any of the studios are listening,
Yeah,
We
right.
should be
If you're
so lucky.
listening, we have so much content
Yeah.
to offer you.
Well, I was going to ask, I'm keeping an eye on the hour, and there's something I want to explore, knowing that you come from TV, which is writing strong characters. How do you go about developing characters that pop off the page? And do you have a particular methodology for extracting the essence of who someone is when you write for them, whether for TV or in books?
Post-its, Josh. Were you not listening?
Yeah, Post-its. No, that's a really good question. I mean, honestly, I'm always hoping that the characters pop. I think I tend to be a pretty thematic writer. Like, I find a theme that I'm interested in writing about, whether it's, a fear of moving on, insecurity about something. Like, I kind of go that way first. And then once I kind of have a theme I'm interested in, I kind of think about who's the character who would explore that. And I mean, if there's any process that I think the most on, it's definitely character voice, because, being a writer, you have to be an observant person, right? The goal, you're trying to just observe the world, because that's where you pull things from. And writing distinct characters is, I think, the most challenging part. Now, I will say writing in animation is kind of interesting, because typically animated projects are so specific, and like, you're writing, again, SpongeBob, you're writing for this optimistic sponge who's kind of kooky. Like, it's a very specific archetype, so you can really lean into it. And then Squidward is a very specific archetype, so you can really lean into that. And so I think, like, when you're writing something that's a really pushed reality like that, it's a little bit easier, because you can really just kind of lean into the ridiculousness of these characters. But then when you're writing something that's a little bit more true to life, it's trickier, because if you just think about life in general, people, like, if you look at Winnie the Pooh and Tigger, how different they are. But in life, we all our Venn diagram tends to be at least a little bit like larger. So it's really, for me, I just lean into a character, and I'll reread them over and over as I'm writing, just to see, like, okay, is this my vernacular or is it their vernacular? Let me make sure that I'm not just like, I think that's why a lot of people tend to write themselves, like, when they're first writing, because it's the voice they know the best. But yeah, in terms of making sure a character pops off the page, it's really tough. And if nothing else, I just try to make sure, like, depending on what the project is, because I tend to write comedies mostly, but sometimes I write more dramatic things, so it's different. In comedies, I just am like, okay, am I laughing with this person? Every time, are they moving? Am I laughing? And then am I, you also don't want to fall into that line of, like, I don't respect them, or is there a redeeming quality about them, right? Are they just, like, there are some absurd shows that are just funny for the sake of being funny, and it's okay. But, like, I think The Office is a great example of a show that,
I was just gonna say Michael Scott. Like, he's a
Michael
perfect
Scott
example
like,
of that, because he has this
him.
heart element. Yeah, because
Yes.
you find him endearing, instead of just like this annoying buffoon that, like, could go either way. But they tie it back in every episode, and you're like, oh,
right? Because
you
feel like you sympathize, because you just see, like, the insecure. You see how insecure he is. And so that heart, you just feel for him. So when I'm writing a character, I'm also asking myself, like, will anybody see at least a part of themselves in it. And maybe not, I don't know. I can't always answer that question, but I try to go. And also, one of the things I try to do is I really try to base characters off of either actors or people I know. Because then at least I feel like, no, I know this person, and I can stand behind that.
It's really hard, like you're saying, to come up with like, entirely original character and then stay in that character and then continue on with like a whole book. Because like what you're saying, like, yeah, I have to like draw from something I know or an experience that I've been in before. So I can be like, no, this tracks, like this person would do this thing because I was that person, or like my best friend did do that thing. Like, okay, like I have these like parameters because I feel like as a myself anyways, I can easily take like a hard left and just be like, off in no man's land if I'm trying to make up a character that I don't have any sort of like bumpers for. It's like bumper bowling almost. Like you need these sort of like end pieces to be like, oh, okay, this is as far as she would go this way and this is how she would react up and down this line. And I also, like, sort of a comment / question to you, I also, like, if I'm writing dual narrative or like, dual chapters in a book, it's like that becomes really hard too, because then I'm like, wait, is this just one person with like two different names? Is it becoming really flat? Like, how do I differentiate from that one voice to this other voice? So it's coming from the same person, obviously. I'm writing them both, but like making that choice or like figuring out those couple of things, to set it apart is hard.
Yeah. I mean, what is the archetype that they fit? And how does that archetype interact with the world? I think is really nice. A nice way to think about it. Like what essence do they distill?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And I think the more you can just observe people, it's sort of like sometimes I probably am thinking too much about the specific wording. Like I want to make sure that their wording is them and not this person. But what you realize is we all kind of share the same language. So we say a lot of things, but it's like the intention behind the words. That's what I also try to really focus on. It's not that Squidward wouldn't say the same things as SpongeBob, but his intention behind them would be very different potentially. So I really try to focus on that. And sometimes I also, like maybe a first pass of something, I'll make things a little more literal than I will later. I like really pull out things later. That way it leaves a lot more subtext. But sometimes I'll really, because also it's like sometimes you're thinking, okay, I'm trying to get to this moment. Okay, this person's going to say this. And you're like, well, that feels like, this doesn't feel accurate. It feels like I'm forcing them to go there. And so it's like, sometimes I also just try to remind myself that most people don't say what they're actually thinking and you still get there. So like, you don't have to explain every little moment or any little creative thought you're having,
Yeah, right. That's a good point. It's like I have to remind myself that sometimes too in picture books or novels, whatever, like even for older audiences, is like your audience is smarter than you think they are. Like I guess I'm writing in a way that's not like I think my audience is not clever enough to get it, but in a way where I'm like, oh, I'm over explaining what I'm trying to say because I like can't get there and don't feel super articulate. So I'm like really going over the top with like, no, this is what I'm trying to say. Do you get it? Are you here with me? Like what, but then like you're saying in revisions, you go back over and you're like, no, of course they got it from this like one line. Like you can take out all the rest of this. Like we're with you.
I think that I've mentioned this to some people. Like for me, I sometimes find that the hardest part in writing is figuring out what not to write.
Yes. Yeah.
Because it's just, that's the part that I just, that those are like the sort of gaps where you're like, what not to say? Like, what should I not be saying right now? That to me, I feel like, because I kind of know where, if I'm writing something, potentially I know where a scene's going and this and that. But it's like, that is the part I struggle with the most when I'm working on stuff, is like what not to put down. It's easy just to put like, everything you think. And it's like, you can actually get to a scene. You can get through a scene saying very little and having all of the effect that you need. And it's just like learning to sort of trust yourself, which I don't know what your process is, but for me, whenever I write something, I have like 3 people that I trust that I read it, and I try very hard not to give them a bunch of qualifiers, because like sometimes, you send the email, you're like, read this. This is what I was trying to do
Also,
here.
it sucks. I'm sorry.
Yeah. You just go
Totally.
like, just don't say anything. Just try your best not to say anything.
Right.
Let them read and go like, what were just like, and I try really hard too when I'm giving feedback. Before I give anything specific, I just read it in its entirety and then ask myself like, did I like it? Because I think if you give someone something and you ask them to read it because you're looking for feedback, they're going to find something that's like, you know what I mean? Like you could do that with anything, your clothes, your this. So for me, I try to read something just right off the bat, go, did I like it? And if the answer is yes, then great. Then everything is just like a cakewalk from there. It's like, well, maybe you could do this or that. Because sometimes before you think that, if you just start giving feedback, you might end up like eviscerating the whole thing and then realizing like, oh, but I liked it. Because by the end you're like, so wait, what should I change? And like, well, I don't know. I really liked it. And you're like, well, you just gave me 100 reasons or 100 things that weren't working for you.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, right. It's like if you like it, that's great. And then it's like, okay, but I liked it. Let's take it to the next level. Like, what can we do from there? Right. As opposed to like, or sometimes you read stuff like even my own stuff too. And I'm like, this feels really flat. Like, what is missing? Like, what did I not do? And so I have to go back over it and be like, why am I not excited about this? Like, I hate this thing, like what can I put in here? It's like, there's no, like, it all feels the same, and there's no like peaks or valleys, so you don't feel anything. It's just like this very like, so you're like, okay, well, let me like fix this. Yeah. So anyways, man, well, it is over the hour, and I could talk to you about writing and process like all day. I feel like there's so much more to say. So thank you for coming on and just like, chatting nerd stuff with us, because this was really interesting.
Of course. Yeah, I really enjoy. I love talking the process of, I also just love hearing, for me, it demystifies, like, I remember, quick story, one time when I was working on this show called Bunsen is a Beast, which was created by the same guy who did Fairly Odd Parents, and so I was the writer's assistant on that, and I remember that show was all like group written, so essentially we all were in the room, I would type everything, and I think I loved working on that show, and one of my favorite parts of working on that show was that everyone in that room had so much experience. I mean, St. Elsewhere, Harry and the Hendersons, like all these people came from like big shows.
Wow.
But getting to sit in that room and see how everyone came at story, like when you read a finished script and it's like really good, you're like, man, you read someone else's script and you're like, man, I'll never be as good as this person. But when you see their process and you see the same moment that everyone's like, shoot, I don't know, like maybe we could just do that. You kind of go, oh man, all right, like great. You just, it demystifies it. It made me feel like, yeah, this is what writing is. I mean, maybe not everybody, but most writers, even the most talented writers, come to every story being like, shoot, I don't know, maybe he says that. And you're like, okay, great. I do that too. When you read something, you're just like, wow, they knew everything. They were just like, boom, boom, boom.
Right. Like they just showed up and they were like, this is my, this is my rough draft. What do you think? Yeah, no, you're right. Exactly. Like nobody does like, that. That's not a thing. Like you have to get there like little by little. Yeah. Which is, it makes you feel better. You
can go back and think like Shakespeare is like with a lantern being like, oh, and what does Romeo say? I mean, and it's like, yeah, he did that too. It's just very, I love it. So anyway, that's why I really enjoy reading people's scripts and then talking process, because I think for me, selfishly, it just makes me feel better. It makes me feel like, yeah, we're all in this together. Like if there's someone who just came up to you and said, dude, writing is so easy, I would be like, okay, now my soul is crushed. So what do you mean?
Yeah. Right. Those are the people whose writing is not very good. Because they don't take the time to be
because if someone told me that writing was really easy, and then I read their manuscript and it was beautiful, I'd be like, you know what? Maybe this isn't for me after all. You know what I mean?
Right. Like maybe I do something else.
Yeah, they really got it all together. It's easy. Their drafts are beautiful. They're making me cry.
That was Kirk. But yeah, I think that was Kirk.
Yeah, exactly. That was Kirk.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you for having me. I really, really appreciate it, and thank you for letting me shout out my book. I'm hoping, for people to keep buying it, and hopefully, kids find it as silly as I'm hoping, that I found it writing it. So
Yeah,
Totally.
it's
And
delightful.
I mean, where do you want people to go to buy it? Shout out like where to look for it.
let's see. I think Paper Cuts their website, but it's also distributed through Simon and Schuster. It's basically, it can be found on any site that you want. Barnes and Noble's website. If it's in a local store, which I don't know, but I always am a big fan of supporting local stores if possible.
Yeah, right. Order it from your indie on nuts.
Yeah. Or if you have a local bookstore that you love, maybe pitch it to them to say, hey, you want to carry this? I'll buy it from you.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, super funny, really hilarious, really well done. I mean, just like a really fun read. So yeah, if you've got kids out there who love graphic novels, pick this one up.
Thank you. That's much appreciated. Thank you to both of you.